So we already had academic 15 minutes for everybody who wanted to be late. So yes, tonight we are going to be discussing philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre, French philosopher, philosophy non-existentialism, but I deliberately put Sartre's existentialism because there are also existentialisms for other philosophers, and they are not necessarily the same. So last time, whoever was here, and I can see that quite a few people were last time here as well when we discussed Albert Camus. Camus is also existentialist, but as you will see tonight, Camus is very different, and Sartre is also much more philosophical. Although Sartre writes great novels, as great as Camus, but is much more philosophically profound. And that makes a little bit more difficult job for me to do. I mean, to give justice to Sartre, it would be very difficult to put whole of Sartre's philosophy in one talk and one evening. So we may be doing again discussion on Sartre, especially discussion on his magnum opus, and this is Being and Nothingness. So this is his main work. I will be mentioning a few of these important themes from the Being and Nothingness tonight, but I'm not going to go deep into the work itself because we simply don't have time, and it's a very deep and profound piece of philosophy. So I'm going to be focusing on his first novel called Nausea, which was published in 1938, and why I've chosen this as a main focus, simply because Nausea contains everything important in Sartre's philosophy. So all the major themes are actually in there. So although Nausea is a prima facie relatively easy book to read, maybe not, but something that most of the people can grasp up to the point. Nausea is actually very complicated and very philosophical book at the same time. And what makes Nausea so profound and so complicated is actually the number of themes which are covered in the book. So before we get into the main topic tonight, I just want to say that Sartre existentialism is first of all atheistic. So there is no God for Sartre. So this is the first premise. The presupposition of his existentialism is there is no God, right? So if there is no God, as Nietzsche said in Gay Science, we are free to do whatever we want. Even Dostoevsky says in The Man from the Underground, well, if there is no God, that means that everybody can do whatever everybody wants. Up to the point, that's true. So Sartre takes on that and continues. So there is no God, therefore there are no moral norms, there are not boundaries, and we are ultimately free. We are absolutely free to do whatever we want to do. So it sounds great, isn't it? Sounds great to the point, yes. That Sartre will say later that we are condemned to freedom. So also, although freedom is so precious and so much more welcome for everybody throughout history, freedom at the same time also means responsibility. Very, very common, very 21st century question. So more freedom you have, that means that more responsibility you have. So if God is dead, and we are free to do whatever we want, we have to pay for the consequences, whatever they are. So if they are good, fine, is our making, but if the consequences are bad, we have to take the responsibility for them. So freedom means responsibility. So the main themes in Nausea that we're going to cover tonight something that is very known for people who read Sartre, that this is actually the main message of existentialism, and that is that existence precedes essence, right? So we are not created by God, we don't have any essence, we come to this world accidentally, it's not our will, and therefore we create ourselves. So we are the artists of ourselves, and whatever we paint, this is how we are going to end up. So this is the famous responsibility in Sartre's existentialism. So existence precedes essence. We don't have any essence. We are absolutely free, because having essence means that we are categorized, we are generalized, right? We are objectivized, but without essence, we are constantly free and absolutely free. So we give ourselves, we make ourselves, we mold ourselves, we give ourselves content. So this is the first one that you will see how that prevails throughout the novel. The second theme is about nothingness. So for Sartre, nothingness is more important than time. Sartre, during the war, he was imprisoned by Germans, and while in prison he read Heidegger's book Being and Time, which was one of the most important philosophical works of the 20th century. So Sartre didn't consider time so much important as Heidegger in relations to our lives and the meaning of our lives, but he considered nothingness to be more important. Again, everything orbits around that freedom that existentialism is about to offer us. So why nothingness? So basically we come from nothing. We don't have any essence, right? We come from nothing and we go into nothing, because when we die, we simply disappear. And now in the middle, there is something we call life. But Sartre said that's nothingness as well, because we can't call it, we can't give an essence to that. And this is another problem. And you will see this is when it comes to his moral philosophy. Nothingness offers freedom, but at the same time constantly drags with that huge responsibilities that we humans have. The good part of the book is actually Antoine's contemplation about the world around himself and his anxiety that arises from that contemplation. He looks at the objects, and by understanding objects in the way that we perceive them, he concludes about thing in itself and things for itself. So objects, like for example glass, table, chair, light, these objects have no meaning whatsoever unless we give it meaning. So we have to call this glass, we have to give it a shape, the size. When we look at the chair, we say, oh, it's a gray chair, it's a black chair, green chair, is oval shape, is rectangular shape. So we are the ones who decide about the meaning of that particular object, because that object has no meaning in itself. Therefore, he calls it thing in itself. Now, we humans, because we have consciousness, we are things for ourselves. So this is important to distinguish, because again, in his moral philosophy, we're gonna face this once again. So thing in itself, thing for itself. Objects are things in itself because they don't have meaning. We give them meaning, and we are things for itself because we give ourselves meaning. There is another very famous, obviously, theme. Most of you who read Sartre heard about that, don't remember, is bad fate. So what is Sartre calling bad fate? Again, related to freedom, and I will explain that a little bit once I get into the novel. So his main character in Oja is Antoine Roquentin, or whatever French says, maybe something different. So Antoine is the guy who is historian, and he is appointed to work on a 19th century politician and his life. He ends up in some small town in France, simply because in that town the library has the most um, the most written documents and papers on that particular diplomat that he calls Monsieur Rollet-Bon. This is why he is there. And he spends every day, the whole day, simply working on the history of Monsieur Rollet-Bon. But the book starts with his observation of things, of objects. He's looking in his room, he's looking at the chair, he's looking at the paintings, he's looking at the window, cigarettes on the table, and he starts thinking about the existence of all these things, how they exist. And he concludes that these things simply come out of nowhere. He starts contemplating about the nothingness. And then he continues further, as I mentioned, he starts thinking about how meaningless they are, because all these objects, they have absolutely no meaning. They have a purpose, they have instrumental value, but they have no meaning whatsoever. So they can be there, they don't have to be there. So we decide. And by thinking that way, he concludes also that nothingness starts overwhelming him. And he starts experiencing that feeling of nausea, of anxiety. He's not comfortable with that. And why is that? It's simply because he starts contemplating about himself being an object. So he said, why am I here? I exist. I didn't even ask for that. I'm simply thrown in this world. And he concludes, we are thrown. This is Heidegger's famous thrownness. He says, we are thrown in the world. When we get born, we are thrown into the culture, into religion, into society, and we simply had to deal with it. Right? It's not our choice. Time. You can be born in 16th century, 19th, 21st. You simply don't choose. And all this contemplation about meaninglessness of existence starts bothering him. And we will see why is that a problem for Antoine. Antoine is very much influenced by his professor Husserl, who is famous phenomenologist, and Husserl's philosophy is based on a principle that we know about things and about people because of phenomena, because of what we see, of our experience. So Husserl was the one who actually initiated that philosophy of non-existence of meaning of objects. So I know about this glass because I see it as it is, but you see it differently, somebody else see it differently, also colors. So we depend on that phenomenology, we see things. So he concludes that everything he knows, everything he experiences is based on his appreciation of his understanding of a phenomena. He doesn't know anything about meaning of things. That being said also means that only what exists right now in present, only that is considered real. But what doesn't exist, or the past, Sartre doesn't want to consider as important part of our lives. So for him, past and future are redundant. So we exist right now, but also that is connected with freedom. Because if you say, Sartre, connect yourself, as many people do, with your past, so your past experiences start deciding your actual life right now, you are losing because you are not free. You are literally living that bad fate. So you are imprisoned in your own past. So how many people are imprisoned in their own past? A lot of people. You say, I had a boyfriend and he was very bad with me, and because of that I don't like any man anymore, right? Sartre says that's wrong. So life goes on and you change. And we change. We are not statues, we are not static. Therefore, we have to allow ourselves that freedom to change, to make opinions, to keep choosing different choices. Now we're coming to that famous bad fate. So Antoine constantly gets that feeling of nausea. He doesn't feel well. He starts thinking that his life doesn't make any sense, and he is here just for no reason. He already approved that with the thinking itself, thinks for itself, non-essential things, all their superfluous existence, which is there, is simply extra, is non-important, not necessary, we don't need it. And Then he starts focusing on his own existence, and he thinks, okay, what do? I wake up in the morning and I run into that library and I'm there for 8 to 10 hours and I read about Monsieur Rolebon, and I'm simply making him alive while he's taking over my life. Is this what I want to do? Is this who I want to be? Him? No, he says, I don't want it. And he realizes that there is something that Sartre calls bad faith. When you are not living your life as free as you possibly can, you are not having all these choices in front of you, you're not choosing anything, you have just chosen one thing to do, and you're identifying yourself with your profession. Sounds familiar, isn't it? Sartre will later say that in different places, like for example, existentialist humanism, and also in his famous magnum opus, Being and Nothingness. He will talk about bad faith. He will talk about people being known as, oh, he is Swedish. Oh, he is an electrician. Oh, that guy, he is a bartender. But Sartre said, how can you say about human being to be something like that? How can you narrow down? How can you simplify his existence simply because he is white, or he is Swedish, or he is an electrician, or he is a dancer? That humans can be everything they want to be. So this is what he calls bad faith, when people identify themselves with their profession, or when people identify themselves with their occupation. You may be a religious person and nothing else, and that's the most important thing in your life. But you can also be, apart from being religious, you can be something else. So this is something that will come at the end. And he finds in the book, in Noja, he finds that being a historian writing about Monsieur Rolebon, he is simply living his life and he's not living his own life. And that makes him again even more nauseated. Now he takes that bad faith and he contemplates about relationships. He sits in the cafe and he sees young people, couples who are laughing there, and they all pretend to be happy and all that. And he says, Sartre says, actually Antoine says, well, they are young, they are happy, or maybe they just pretend they're happy. He says, after they had sex, what are you going to do? They're sitting there and rejuvenating their energy by eating a new meal, trying to conceal their real existence and getting ready for another encounter. You see, existentialism is not very romantic. And this is exactly one of the questions later on. So everything for Sartre, everything that we call love, understanding, matching partners, sense of humor, this and that, this is all embellishing. All that we really want to do is actually to possess the other person, to possess his freedom. But the problem is that the other person, other partner wants to do the same. And then we have that collision, and we have that, at Camus would call absurdity. You have to be in that battle constantly. And that is what creates anxiety and makes you nauseated as well. So he looks at this world and he's not very happy with whatever he sees, because he sees through the phenomena. He's trying to give meaning to existing things, to existing people, and also to the relationship between people. His famous scene in the park, this is how the book finishes, is when Antoine is sitting in the park and looking at the massive chestnut tree in front of him. And again, he's thinking about the existence of that tree. He's looking at the bark, he's looking at the trunk of the tree, the branches, leaves. He looks at the big roots which are spreading out of the trunk and literally diving into the soil, into the earth. And he thinks how this tree never asked to be there. And is simply there. He's obviously metaphorically thinking about his own life. So that he doesn't want to be that tree, because that tree cannot move from there. That tree cannot even call itself a tree. That tree doesn't know which color it is. It doesn't know anything about branches, right? But it's there. And then Antoine says, yeah, I can see the tree is simply getting old and dying there, and can't even die. But will die. And will go into nothingness as well. So this is that problem of being here as superfluous. He contains that his life is also superfluous. He says, I'm here, I'm superfluous, I shouldn't be here. I didn't ever think about being born, I didn't want it. And now I'm here. And I'm gonna be like this tree. Somebody's gonna be looking at me. That's the problem. Somebody's gonna make me an object. See how deep psychologically Sartre goes into the mentality of Antoine. So he finds that that we are all born without a reason. And he thinks, you know what, maybe I should kill myself. But then he says, then even my body will be superfluous. It's gonna be rotting inside some ditch. And it's just gonna be there, and it shouldn't be there. So it's simply, there is no way out for Sartre, no exit, almost like his first play. That thinking, that contemplation about contingency of existence, which he thinks is the most important thing, not existence itself, but contingency. So you exist, you will have to constantly change. You are not static because you don't have essence. You are absolutely free. You should constantly make your new choices. That brings him to the point that he decides not to write the book against Monsieur Rolebon anymore, but to maybe create something new that he calls adventure. So what would that be? He concludes that be a new book that he will write. So basically Sartre is sending us a message. So instead of being pessimistic, being nihilistic, instead of suffocating at the bottom of that huge boredom, one should be creative. So one should do something with his unlimited human capacity, aesthetic, ethic. So the question is, why is Sartre writing this? The question is, are people using their capacities or they are not? And he finds in art, the same as Camus, he finds that art is the way out, or creation. You don't have to be an artist in sense of a sculptor or a musician, but you can be the artist of your own life, as Nietzsche taught. So to be an artist means to create something new, to create an adventure. So this is how the book is finishing. I try to narrow down as much as possible as I possibly could. And I left for the end this ethical part of Sartre's philosophy, which you will straight away connect with everything I said so far. First of all, that thing in itself and thing for itself. And why is Sartre saying that hell is other people? Nice, isn't it? Hell is other people. So Sartre says the following: I for myself, I am thing for itself. A problem arises when the next person next to me is looking at me. What he sees in me, he sees only the phenomena. He sees my face, my eyes, my shirt, he sees my body, he sees everything that he thinks is enough for him to create my character. So this is why you can be looking at me now and thinking, oh, this guy is absolutely horrible. I know him. I know what he does and what he wants to achieve. Or you can think something completely opposite. Sartre says you cannot think anything about me simply because my character you cannot reach. So all you can do is to try to generalize me, to make me an object, to conceptualize me so you can manipulate with me the way you want it. You want to make an object out of me. You want to make the thing in itself and give me the meaning. Now the problem is that I do the same thing as everybody here. I do the same thing with everyone. And this is something that he's called intersubjectivity. Is another phenomenon. So you see, the thing is, other people are constantly looking at us. And he gives an example. For example, when you happen to be you're passing by some window and you see a doll inside dressed, and you think that doll is actually a real person, so you behave very differently. But the moment you realize that this is just a doll dressed up in the window, you completely change. All of a sudden you're relaxed. So why is that? Because we always want other people to have certain opinion about us, the way that we want them to think about us. So we are projecting ourselves into their freedom. So we depend on other people. We need other people. Because Sartre says, how would I know about myself if not from other people and their reactions? So that situation of taking my freedom, objectivizing me, generalizing me, this is what he calls bad faith. But also bad faith is something else. He looks at the waiter in the cafe and he says, this guy is playing to be a waiter. Look at his steps. Look how quickly he moves. Look how he holds the tray. When somebody calls him, he makes a gesture, he turns around, there's a specific move, because we expect him to behave like that. And then he runs back to the bar with the same short, quick steps, takes the tray with the drinks, and then with the very specific moves, he comes back to the customers, and he is polite and he says things which are expected for him. So he is acting, he says. He wants to be a waiter. But is he a waiter? He is much more than that. So the problem that he sees, and this is something that everybody should think about, is that everybody wants to be a waiter in a way. Everybody wants to identify with his own or her own profession. Because that narrows the amount of freedom upon you, and therefore narrows the amount of responsibility. So that guy who is a waiter has nothing else to do with anything else. He just want to be a waiter. So the dentist doesn't want to do anything else, just to be a dentist. He's not interested in politics, he's not interested in art, in history, he's not interested in anything else. But for Sartre, this is unacceptable, because human ability is unlimited, and the freedom that we have, a number of choices, they are unlimited. And when you compartmentalize yourself into simple profession and activity, and you identify yourself, this is for him something that he calls dehumanization. So he wants us to live full life, experience new areas of knowledge, of art, etc., etc., meet new people, talk about different things, because this is what we can do, meet other cultures. So this is written in 1938, and it applies to us perfectly now, even more. Because people now are being so professionalized, they become so narrowed down to perform just single function, that that's really unacceptable. And they don't want, I know a lot of people who, I know them very well, and if we don't talk about cars because they're in car industry, there is nothing else they can be talking about. So how human is that? So this bad faith, in a way, is something that we want. We want to go down. We want to narrow our choices in order to narrow the amount of freedom, the amount of burden of freedom. And this is why he says we are condemned to be free, because we are free, we have no essence, and we are what we make out of ourselves. So that huge responsibility, that absolute freedom, is what most of the people don't want it. And he was criticized heavily later on from the communists, from the feminists, from the religious people, from governments, that existentialism is actually separating individual from the community. Existentialism is only taking on the bad side of humanity, not on the good sides, etc., etc., because he wasn't understood properly. But as you heard now, this huge amount of freedom is something that takes with itself a lot of responsibility. So we can talk about different issues now. For example, how can existentialism help us now in 21st century? Can it help us to beat loneliness and isolation? The same thing that existentialism is accused of promoting. Is subjectivism undoubtedly leading to anarchy and resignation? Because existentialism is subjectivism. But Sartre thinks that's a real humanism, something like Kant in his critique of judgment, where he talks about aesthetic experience, and he calls it subjective universality. What an oxymoron! How can be subjective universality? You see, this is the problem with language. Yes, it can be subjective universality. Kant said the same thing. If it's subjective, that means it belongs to everyone, and everyone means universal. Therefore, subjective aesthetic experience is universal simply because it's subjective. Sartre has been criticized that his subjectivism leads to anarchy and resignation, and is anti-humanist. Yes. So what can we do? What do you think people can do? Should people take that absolute responsibility by choosing absolute freedom? Or this is impossible to do? Is Sartre's philosophy something that applies to everybody, can be labeled universal? Or is maybe very individualistic, maybe very subjective? So thank you for this, giving me time to explain a few things about Sartre. And now the more important part is that we discuss what we know the best and what we don't like. Okay, thank you.